Welcome to WanaxTV Live. In this episode, we ask the question, who were the Trojans, as we talk about the Trojan identity in the Bronze Age. Before we begin, I'd like to thank to everybody joining us live in the chat. Shout out to Luis Aldamis, The Real Tomahawk, Pelasgian Skeleton. We have quite a few people in the chat already. Arthur. In this, also, special thanks to Lino Benetti. Hopefully, we see him in the episode today as well. We'll see. Before we begin, also, I'd like to thank to all of the channel subscribers, all of the Patreons and YouTube members. And of course, you can join us on our community page, which you can see on the screen right now as you click on the WanaxTV YouTube channel. To the right-hand side of the right-hand side button, to the right-hand side of a subscribe and join buttons, you have a community one. Click on that, and even as a viewer, you are a community member, and you can start a topic, make a post, and discuss about any historical topic that you would like. Shout out to Red Time or Red Carpet Time Traveler in the chat. Great to see you here as well. Also, you can join us on Patreon as a free member, which you see the name of the page on screen, patreon.com/WanaxTV. So if you happen to have Patreon, you can join us as a free member, and you still have access to all of the content that we have there. Some of the videos come early on Patreon, some of the pictures from museums, archaeological sites, and so on. From time to time, we drop that content on Patreon. Leoforos is in the chat. Shout out to Leoforos. Shout out to Kosice Milicia. Who else do we have? Lionhawk, Alexandros. Shout out to Alexandros in the chat. Of course, Luis Aldames. Great to see him here. We have a good turnout here already. I saw we had a lot of people waiting when I was about to start the stream. So thank you everybody for being here. We are displaying the segments of this episode on the screen right now. So, who were the Trojans? A very interesting, very fascinating topic for us today. I divided the episode into 4 segments. First, prehistorical and historical Troy. We are going to talk about those archaeological layers of the Bronze Age site of Troy, spanning from late Neolithic, actually 3600, all the way 3600 to 3000 BC, concerning Troy Zero, which is technically a Neolithic period still, but really going through all of the Bronze Age layers of the archaeological sites all the way till 1200 BC. Even after that, I believe Troy 7A is dated to had ended at 1180 BC, and Troy 7B. We're going to talk about that one as well, very relevant to our discussion here. So that's segment number 1. The second one is Late Bronze Age Troy, or Vilusa as it was known in the Hittite records. We're going to give a little background on that, on the historical sources that we have on Troy, contemporary ones in the late Bronze Age, primarily the Hittite sources. Number 3, we're going to talk about the famous Luwian seal, which was found in the archaeological layer of Troy 7B, I believe. Yes, and that's a very interesting. I believe the only inscription on a language found at the site of Troy is this Luwian seal. So very relevant. We'll talk about that, and we'll finish the episode off with the theories on identity and language of the Trojans in late Bronze Age, but also throughout the Bronze Age, which is also very important because the site itself had been inhabited for so long so long that we have legitimate questions whether or not there had only been one or perhaps multiple populations inhabiting the site throughout the millennia, really. So all of these questions, very important, very interesting, and very relevant to our discussion. I think that we're about to have a great episode here. We have Tato in the chat. Shout out to you. Shout out to Yanis, of course. Hello from Salamina in Greece. Thank you for being here, Yanis. Always great to have you here. I think that we covered all of the leading people in the chat right now, covered the topic, the segments of the episode, and it might be the right moment to dive in the first segment, which is the archaeological layers of prehistorical and historical Troy. Leophoros says, although I like scenarios that presents the Trojans as Greeks, most likely they were not Greeks, but they were actually closer to people like Luwians with Mycenaean Greek influence, of course. Very interesting take, Leophoros. I think that your take will actually be relevant to our episode here. So thank you very much for that. How long will the stream be? The stream will be about 1 hour long. So we started at about 3:40 p.m. Eastern Time. At around 4:40, 4:45, we're going to conclude the episode. Also, before we dive in, I would like to tell you that within the next week, we're going to have another video, one of the two videos that come out in the month of April will be uploaded, and it will be the Lemnian language and the people behind the famous stelae of Lemnos, the connections with Pelasgians, Tyrrhenians, other possible tribes. We're going to analyze the sources and everything else. So the scenario is already done. Right now I'm doing the voice for the video, after which I'll do the animations, and you can expect the WanaxTV video. So not a live episode like we're doing today, a proper video, similar that we did with King Pelasgus a few weeks ago. The next one will be about the Lemnians and the Lemnian language, also a very interesting topic. So, with that being said, prehistorical and historical Troy. Prehistorical, we say only because this first layer, well, we do not have any contemporary written evidence coming from Troy itself throughout its whole history in Bronze Age, but nevertheless, Troy Zero is or was the very first settlement, which I think that it's more productive for me to put a picture on the screen for you so you can see what we're talking about here rather than just text. So give me a second. Here we go. All right. So you see the archaeological layers on the screen much better now. Troy Zero is not presented here, but nevertheless, it's similar, but even smaller, more fragmental than Troy 1. So technically, Troy Zero is the very first layer that gives us trace of population in this area, which is dated to about 3600 to 3000 BC. Not much has survived from that fragment. I believe that even the citadel itself was not walled at that time as it was in Troy 1, as you can see on the screen. So all of these layers, especially from Troy, let's say Troy 0, but also Troy 1, which you can see in brown color in the screen. So just the citadel itself appears to have been the site of the settlement in those times, but already Troy 2 from 25 to 2300 BC, you can see how the citadel itself has been expanded here, including the ramp. So these first two layers, and also, so yeah, these first two layers were dealing with the time period of 3000 to 2300 BC, pretty much. And the population in this period is very unlikely to have been Indo-European. I think that it's a fair assessment on our part that if we are going to judge which language was used in this period, very unlikely to have been an Indo-European language, at least the first two layers, including the layer 0, so 3 layers technically. What is also interesting is that the archaeological and cultural features of this very early settlement of archaeological Troy is reminiscent of other Aegean settlements, such as those on the islands of Lemnos, Lesbos, even Thessaly, I believe. So Troy, the site of Troy in this early period looks reminiscent to the overall Aegean culture of the region and much less so of the inner Anatolian areas. So which population we're dealing with, we are not sure. Perhaps remnants of the Aegean Neolithic population, similar to perhaps possibly Aegean Island. This is not. This is just now a speculation, just a thing to think about. Luis Aldamis says that sounds like Tyrsenian or Pelasgian. Well, we would have to define both Tyrsenian and Pelasgian in that case, whether or not that's a single uniform identity, whether or not that's a single tribe, or perhaps a spectrum consisting of some related peoples, maybe not. So just a speculation at this point, but very relevant as we make a comparison between this early Bronze Age Troy and later settlement of Vilusa, for example, or Homeric Troy, which is corresponding to the late Bronze Age settlement, precisely Troy 6 and Troy 7a. Luis Aldamis says, similar to Lemnos and Thessaly, Pelasgo-Tyrsenians. Well, there are questions. We'll expand on that more when we get to the Lemnian language episode, which is coming in a week, I believe. So we're going to analyze the inhabitants of Lemnos throughout different time periods, starting with late Bronze Age, Greek Dark Ages, when and how the Pelasgians showed up in the island. Were they on Lemnos since the beginning, since the Bronze Ages? Did they show up as told in the ancient Greek sources as connected to Attica, displacing the previous, perhaps Thracian-related population? We're going to analyze all of that, but we at least when it comes to me, I'm just giving out different theories as we speculate on the topic. So I'm going to put the map aside at the moment, so you can see Troy 0, Troy 1, Troy 2, and even Troy 3, 4, 5, especially these several layers that you see in the yellow and the golden letters on the screen. Unfortunately, when we had some of the early archaeologists and people excavating the archaeological site, namely Heinrich Schliemann, for example, we did not have very professional archaeologists at that time. So Schliemann himself was did not really use what would later be designated as professional archaeological practices as he was unearthing the site. So he happened to destroy much of the evidence of these early layers, so that blurs a picture for us a little bit when it comes to the cultures of these early sites. Whether or not during the one of these periods, which we see in yellow on the screen, we had arrival of a new population, or perhaps intermixing between the Neolithic and the early Bronze Age population with some other population. We are not sure about that. Or perhaps it was the same population from the beginning. We are just not sure. What we do know is that by Troy 6, which starts at 1750 BC, spanning to 1300 BC, and Troy 7a from 1300 to 1180 BC, we are basically dealing with late Bronze Age Troy, the same site which corresponds to the kingdom of Vilusa in the Hittite records, and the same site pretty much that corresponds to Homeric Troy of Greek mythology. And we are at 18 minutes right now. Okay. So we also have Troy 7b, which is going to become relevant to us in a bit, especially when we start dealing with the Luwian seal. Troy 8, perhaps less relevant to us. That's a classical, archaic and classical era Troy, when it was already colonized by Aeolian Greeks towards the end or during the Greek Dark Ages. And Troy 9 refers to the Roman era settlement. Okay. All right, we have some discussion on the mythological origins of Troy in the comments. Pelasgian skeleton, Teucros or Teucer was the first. He was from Crete. We're dealing with the mythological founder of Troy, basically. So in Greek mythology, the very first ruler of the area of Troy was a king named Teucros, who came either from Crete or from Athens, from Attica. So there are two versions of his origin. I think that his origin in Crete came from the Roman era writers. If I'm correct, I would have to double check on that. But the original story in Greek mythology was that Teucros was actually from Attica, from the area of Athens. We have a Kosike Militia says, what is the difference between Pelasgians and Tyrsenians? So, to put it very simple, Pelasgians are believed to be the earliest inhabitants of the area of Greece and the Aegean Sea. They are prominently featured in Greek mythology. Not much is known of them historically, of course. They are sometimes designated by the ancient Greeks as a pre-Greek population, pre-Greek Neolithic population before the rise of Greeks in Greece. Sometimes they are designated as ancestors of the Greeks. Some very contradictory statements of them. I'm not sure that the Greeks themselves used the term Pelasgians consistently. I think they switched back and forth with the term Pelasgians. When it comes to Tyrsenians, Tyrsenians is basically a Greek word for Etruscans. So the people of central Italy in Etruria, who were known to the Romans as Tusci or Etrusci, they were known to the Greeks as Tyrhenoi or Tyrsenoi, which is Tyrrhenians or Tyrsenians. So that's basically Etruscans. And the difference between Pelasgians and Etruscans is that Etruscans were from central Italy and Pelasgians were from Greece, but there are possible connections there. There's a possible linguistic connection because the island of Lemnos was before it was colonized by the Athenians. It was populated by the speakers of Lemnian language, which is close to the Etruscan language, and together they form a Tyrsanian family of languages. This we will talk about in the Lemnian language video, which is coming this month. But even with that, there are so many complications and contradictions. In short, it's going to be an interesting episode. So, with that being said, we dive in the late Bronze Age, and now we're dealing with the sites of Troy 6 and Troy 7a. As we have mentioned, Troy 6, 1750 to 1300 BC, Troy 7a, 1300 to 1180 BC, roughly, I believe. So Troy 7a is likely a continuation of Troy 6, actually. The names of these layers were given, I believe, during the initial excavation, during the initial differentiation between these layers, which was done at the time with limited knowledge compared to today. So these are just labels. So Troy 6 is a label to a specific time period, and Troy 7a comes slightly later. But in reality, it is very likely that these two layers designate the very same, the continued city that Troy 6 was not destroyed and then settled by people of Troy 7a. That is very unlikely to have been the case. We do have evidence of a damage by earthquake at around 1300 BC, but there are no signs of battle. There are just signs of rebuilding and continuation of the same site. So, we have a Mycenaean influence in Troy emerging at this point, and this can be seen in the Mycenaean pottery, which is both imported and locally produced in Troy during these time periods, especially towards the end of Troy 6 and throughout Troy 7a. Appearance of Megaron-style buildings, where Megaron-style halls were present within the buildings, a very common feature of the Mycenaean civilization. Although, a caveat, the Anatolian patterns still exist and prevail overall. So both when it comes to pottery and architectural style, there's no case of previous Aegean/Anatolian culture going extinct and being replaced by these Mycenaean influences. No, that was not the case. We only have appearance of Mycenaean pottery, rise of Mycenaean architectural style within Troy, but I believe that was still not prevalent feature within the settlement. Vilusa in the Hittite record. Okay, let me. Okay, we're back. So, Vilusa is mentioned in the in the Hittite records, referring to the site of Troy. Vilusa Okay. Do we have do we have audio right now? We may have fixed it. Let's see. All right. Do we have okay, we're back. Good, good, good. Finally. All right. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why this happened. Nothing was unplugged. Everything was okay. I had to plug the headphones, unplug the program, plug everything back. I'm not sure what happened, but okay, back to it. So from 30 to 36 minutes, basically, or from 26 to 36 minutes, we have been muted. So I'll make sure to put that as a timestamp in the video description. So 35. So 24, 26 to 36, we were muted. And we're back. So uh, I believe that we were stuck at with Vilusa. So Vilusa corresponds to these archaeological layers of Troy 6 and Troy 7a. Vilusa, obviously, the name of Troy in the Hittite records. In the Mycenaean Greek, it is presumed to have been Vilios, and later in Homeric Greek, as the Gamma was lost from the previous late Bronze Age variant of the language. We have loss of digama in the evolution of the ancient Greek dialects. Vilios becomes Ilios, and that is the name of Troy in the Homeric epics, Ilios or Ilion. So we had the Mycenaean influence when it comes to pottery, imports and local produced imitations of the Mycenaean pottery in the late Bronze Age Troy. We have appearance of Megaron style buildings, especially the halls within buildings, but this was not the majority of the settlement. Still, we had the persistence of Aegean/Anatolian features within the architecture of Troy at the time. Obviously, Vilusa in the Hittite records first appears as a part of the anti-Hittite coalition known as Asuva Confederation or Asuva League at the end of the 15th century BC. They were defeated by the Hittites. The Hittites were able to establish many or several client states in the region or vassal states, such as Mira, Seha, Hapala. Some of them switched from time to time. The chief anti-Hittite state in the region was Arzava, sponsored by the Mycenaean Greeks, and for the next more than a century, we had the Mycenaean Hittite proxy wars and battles in the region, which saw hostilities over Vilusa as well. And we also have historically recorded kings of Vilusa in the Hittite sources, the first one being Kukuni in the late 14th century BC. He was described as rather neutral slash friendly ruler to the Hittites. I believe contemporary to great King Shupiluluma I. In the mid to late 14th century BC, he sent messengers to the Hittite court, but appears as an independent ruler. He was not a Hittite vassal, it seems. However, during the time of Alexandru, which is a Hittite rendering of a Greek name, Alexander or Alexandros, the Trojans or Vilusa becomes a vassal state of the Hittites, which we know through the Alexandru Treaty between the Trojan king and the great king of the Hittites. Valmu, the next ruler, is less relevant to us. He was engaged in he was deposed by unclear which forces deposed him, whether he was deposed by locals from Troy, or perhaps there was some Mycenaean meddling in the area. We're not sure, but this is generally this is a time of both Mycenaean and Hittite decline of power in the region. Obviously, we know that what followed was the end of the 13th, beginning of the 12th century BC, the appearance of sea peoples and destruction of many of the Bronze Age kingdoms, such as Hittites, Alasia Cyprus, Mycenaean Greece itself was destroyed. Unknown whether and to which degree the sea peoples took part in some of these destructions, especially when it comes to Greece. We know that some of the sea peoples groups were from the area of Mycenaean Greece. Some of them were Greeks as well. So we are not sure about the relation between the sea peoples and destruction of the Mycenaean Greece, but we do know, based on the Egyptian records, that the sea peoples destroyed Hittites, they destroyed the Ugarit, they destroyed Alasia. Ultimately, they were defeated by the Egyptian pharaohs, first by Merneptah and then finally by Ramses III. Either way, shout out to Josh Gardner joining us in the chat. Thank you for being here once again. I will have to designate the time period when this stream was muted for unknown reasons. We are being sabotaged. Who could be sabotaging WanaxTV? Maybe it's I don't know. The Persians. I'm kidding. Um, okay, so with this being said, we're going to the next segment, which is Luwian seal. Very important to this discussion here. Luis Aldame says, sea peoples is too generic to be meaningful in this context, specifically as most were Aegean themselves. I agree with Luis Aldames here. All right, before we begin, perhaps check some of the discussions that we have in the comments. Josh Gardner just finished watching a comparative myth live stream, and I'm excited for this live stream. Well, thank you very much, Josh, for being here. Pelasgian skeleton, that's why we went back to destroy it later. Okay. They betrayed their own people, joining our former enemy, the Hittites. Well, I think it is very questionable to which degree was Vilusa a vassal state to the Hittites. Obviously, we have this Alexander Treaty, which made Vilusa vassal at the time of Alexander in the early 14th century 13th century BC, 1290-ish. But we also have immediate hostilities with the Mycenaeans over Vilusa. And shortly after that, we also have Priam basically appearing at the same time, taking over, defeating Hittite vassal in Seha and making him a vassal of a Mycenaean governor in Miletus. And then a few decades later, Piamaradu is still active, wreaking chaos in Western Anatolia. And then by the mid of the century, when we have, or by the later part of the century, when we have Tudhalia IV being the Hittite king and the decline of the Mycenaean influence in Western Asia Minor, we have deposition of Valmu at the same time. So perhaps from Alexandru to Valmu, which is basically a few decades, several decades, we could say that Troy was a vassal to the Hittites, but earlier than that, Troy appears to be independent, Vilusa does. And especially after that, I believe, after Valmu, we already have a king of Mira being accused by the Hittites of pursuing his own policies, perhaps trying to be a great independent king or a regional independent king on his own. The Hittites were not able to do much at that time, and then several decades later, during Shupililiuma II, we have anti-Hittite coalition in Western Anatolia already, and then that is followed by the destruction at the hands of the Sea Peoples. So it appears that the Hittites were able to effectively exercise vassalage over Velusa just for a brief period of time. All right, so Josh said I was going to blame it on Persian magic. Well, maybe it were the Persians, maybe it were the Etruscans, I don't know, but we were clearly sabotaged. But we made it back. So Alexandros says Luwian hieroglyphs were Minoan hieroglyphs. Sarpedon, brother of Minos, was expelled to Asia Minor and became king of Lycians. Luwians were Minoans who mixed with the Hyksos. Okay, this is a theory by Alexandros. Either way, going back to the Luwian seal, so this seal is the only inscription which is tied to the settlement of Troy. It is dated to a time period after destruction of late Bronze Age Troy, so a site known as Troy 7B, and this is sparse. These are the remnants of late Bronze Age Troy after it was destroyed. It was not totally annihilated. There was a smaller population that continued to live on this site. Perhaps no new buildings were. It was a pretty modest settlement, really tied to either remnants of the previous population, or perhaps some neighboring population used the opportunity to emerge there a little bit. We are not sure, but either way, the settlement continued to be somewhat inhabited between 1180 and 950 BC. This archaeological layer we call Troy 7B, and it is during this time that we have a Luwian seal, the only piece of inscription that was ever found in Troy. It was inscribed using Luwian hieroglyphics, and I will show you how the Luwian seal looks. So it has two sides, as you can see on the screen. The side A, as I designated it, we have inscription which is not fully translated because that's not an easy thing to do, but we have side A, which includes two logograms, one for good or excellent, and another for what is believed to designate a wife or a lady, and then a likely personal name, which possibly could be translated as Pata or something along those lines. So let's say Pata was somebody's wife, and on the side B we have a logogram for a scribe, the person who created this inscription, presumably, and a possible personal name, something like Surata or something similar to that. So once again, take a look at how the seal looked right here. The first version to the left is, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but this should be the one designated Pata, the good wife, on the left side. In the middle, you see the inscription of designating a scribe and his personal name, and then the third one, the one to the right hand side, is basically the side view of the seal. Okay, so what else do we have in the chat? We have Hittite sabotage. Yeah, that could be the case. The Hittite sabotage, maybe. Pelasgian Skeleton says, I think the Hyksos is a term meaning foreign leaders or something like of that sort, but the leaders of the Amorites who invaded and conquered Egypt took the title proudly, and now we refer to Hyksos as that specific group. The Real Tomahawk, shout out to the Real Tomahawk in the chat. He says, I like that theory that Luwians are Minoans mixed with the Hyksos. Yeah, that's an interesting theory. I mean, I'm not sure how much evidence we have for any of that, but Pelasgian Skeleton says it was also used for Nubian leaders. Oh, referring to Hyksos. Okay, so there's a discussion about Hyksos here. We have Pelasgos in the chat. Shout out to Pelasgos or Pelasgos. He says Greek tribes like all here around with three world domination. The Trojan War was essentially a civil war. Homer records that the Trojans also worshipped the 12 gods. Only the Greeks believed in that notion, I suppose. Oh, in the religion. Okay. Yanis says, now I thought about this. Hector in Aeolian actor in Doric. Yes, that one who plays in the theater. Well, actor is also a name of several individuals, I believe, in both Greek mythology and history, historical persons as well. Luis Aldame says Luwian is Hittite related, Anatolian Indo-European, Minoan / Ethio-Cretan are their own thing. Assuans and Pelasgians were likely Thessalians rather. So when it comes to Assuans, we're referring to Assuan Confederation and Asuva or Asia, the region roughly refers to Western Asia Minor, I believe. I'm not sure about Assuans being their own ethnic group. I'm not sure about that. Also, so many contradictions about the Pelasgians. It's really tough to make definite conclusions for me. Luis Aldame says, but I agree with Luis that Luwian is a Hittite-related language. So when it comes to these the early Indo-European languages that appeared in Anatolia during the Bronze Age. I believe Hittite was one, and then we had a Luwic group of languages, which was spoken by populations to the south and west of the core Hittite area. And this Luwic group is later, further divided into Luwian and other languages such as Lydian, I believe that is in Luwic group, but it is not the same as Luwian. So Lydian, the kingdom of Lydia, the kingdom of King Croesus. And when it comes to Luwian languages, then we have this Luwian seal, which appears in Velusa. Now there are different theories whether that seal means that the native population were the Luwians, it was them who created that seal, or it was somebody else. Either way, perhaps there was a Luwian influence, perhaps the scribe was not from there, or it was we are missing a clear context whether or not this Luwian seal was brought from somewhere or it was created by somebody who spoke Luwian. That does not necessarily mean that the whole population was consisting of Luwian speakers, especially since the Luwian language is Indo-European And as we mentioned earlier, in the layers of Bronze Age Troy, these very early layers, Troy 0, Troy 1, perhaps Troy 2 as well, are not necessarily Indo-European speakers, especially Troy 1, for example, which is very related culturally and in architecture and other features to these early Bronze Age populations and settlements of the Aegean region, Lemnos, Lesbos, Thessaly, even. So it is difficult to say whether the appearance of Luwian language in Troy can be dated to Bronze Age, perhaps late Bronze Age, or perhaps after the city was destroyed by presumably Mycenaeans and at the end of the late Bronze Age period. So, with that being said, we're diving into the theories on Trojan language and identity. And I have, before we begin, let's see, Pelasgian Skeleton says the Luwian language is categorized as the Anatolian Indo-European language. That is correct, the same category as Hittite language. Yes, that is correct. I believe the third language in that category is Palaic, spoken by the people in the northern Anatolian region known as Pala. The people the people from the region of Pala. I believe that is the third language of that category. And I believe that Luwian is in the category of Luwic. So Luwian and Lydian form Luwic group, and Luwic group is one of the Anatolian category, Indo-European categories, together with Hittite and Palaic. But that is not necessarily the only categorization. I think that we have different theories on this categorization. So, but either way, yes, Luwian is definitely related to the Hittite somewhat as Indo-European Anatolian language. I agree with that. Yes. Pelasgian skeleton, Asua, I call Asia or Asia, which is Asia in linear B. Yes, that is correct. Pelasgian skeleton, that's absolutely right. Alexandros says the Ahiawa map is outdated. The Mycenaeans had sites in northern mainland Greece, southern present-day Albania, and Mycenaean fortress was found in southern Bulgaria. I'm not sure about that fortress. I do know that Mycenaean sites were found in Epirus, close to the region where the sanctuary of Dodona is located. So Dodona appears to have been very important to the Greeks, even in the Bronze Age, late Bronze Age period. The Mycenaeans apparently had some importance. Viewed Dodona as an important sanctuary, even in the Mycenaean period. Whether or not they had control over the region or they just arrived there to their perhaps tribal relatives just to to visit the site. We have many different theories on that, but yeah, there are Mycenaean traces in Epirus as well. Okay, so the Luwian theory, we went through the Luwian theory. It is based on this Luwian seal, which that means a possible Luwian speaking area in Western Anatolia. And this is also, we know that Luwian language at some point, I believe in the late 14th century BC, became the lingua franca of the Hittite Empire, and by the late 13th century BC, we have Luwian prevailing within the Hittite Empire as opposed to the Hittite language itself. I think, if I'm correct, by the time of Tudhaliya IV, in the later part of the 13th century BC, we have Luwian actually being the chief language, the lingua franca of the Hittite Empire. So maybe because of that we have some Luwian traces all the way in Troy, or another option is that Troy was just a part of the Luwic speaking area. So we are not sure about that. We do have a possible reference to Luvia in the context of Western Anatolia in the early Hittite period. 17th century BC, we have a reference to the regions of Luvia and Pala. And the region of Luvia is perhaps corresponding Western Anatolia. So Luwians in general, there is a fact that later areas of Western Anatolia, such as Lycia, Caria, and others, were actually descendant. The speakers, those were Luwic languages, Lycian, Carian, and others from that area. It gets a little tricky when we get to the northwestern Anatolia. There's no direct evidence as there is with the southwest Anatolia, especially linguistically. So that's why we're in the gray zone a little bit when it comes to this. But the Luwian theory is that Troy, at least in the late Bronze Age, was a Luwian-speaking city, and that's why we have Luwian seal emerging after the destruction of Troy. It has to be noted. So that's one option. Second option is the Hellenic or Greek theory, which we have a king's personal name, Alexandru, Hittite rendering of Greek name Alexander, which gives us a picture of a possible Greek-speaking king or a Greek-speaking dynasty in Troy. So that is important. We have that Mycenaean influences in late Bronze Age site of Troy, emergence of Mycenaean pottery, not dominant in Troy at the time, but still emerging. Local imitations of Mycenaean pottery. We have emergence of architectural style, which is reminiscent of the Mycenaean sites, such as Mycenaean Tiryns. And so possibly we have this Hellenic speaking either population maybe, but rather more possibly would be a ruling class if we want to go by Alexandru being either a Greek speaker or speaker or descending from a group which is related to the Bronze Age Greeks, perhaps distantly related, perhaps closely related. It's just difficult to say, but at least when it comes to the name, we do have these Greek connections here. And also another thing is in Homer that Trojans, unlike some of their allies, Carians, Lycians, I believe, are not designated as barbarians. They do not need translators to communicate with the Greeks. And we do know that some of the Trojan allies need translators to communicate with the Greek heroes. But that is not necessarily evidence, that's epic poetry, so anything is possible in epic poetry pretty much, especially when it is used to achieve certain effect. But yes, we do have Hellenic theory or Hellenic related people, or at least dynasty theory when it comes to Troy. And the third one also a separate Trojan identity and language, so a possibility of a distinct, separate Trojan identity, which is neither Greek nor Luwian. Maybe it is related. Maybe they were related to some of the other peoples in the neighborhood, presumably Indo-Europeans, but also possibly non-Indo-Europeans, because we do know that the site of Troy had been settled since early Bronze Age, and at that time we do not have recorded, at the very least, Indo-European speakers in that area specifically. So that's also a possibility. Distinct Trojan identity, whether or not they were Indo-Europeans or not, or if they were Indo-Europeans, they were related, and to which degree were they related to some of their neighbors, such as Thracians, Phrygians, Mysians, some other Anatolian speakers, maybe some group which is otherwise not recorded. We do not know that, so at this point we can only speculate. Also, a possibility of multiple populations throughout different time periods. This we already mentioned. Possible differences within Trojan population in early Bronze Age and late Bronze Age, especially if we have if there is a Luwian population in Troy in late Bronze Age. Presumably it would have been different to the indigenous Aegean population, which presumably inhabits Troy in the early Bronze Age. So just a few theories to think about. Let's see what everybody thinks. Leophorus says, in Greek mythology, the walls of Mycenae were built by Lycian giants, and we know Priam brought 7,000 Lycians in Argos. I'm not sure that Priam brought anybody in Argos. There's no record of that. Luis Aldamis says, Atlas fits with the Iberian rock art. Okay. All right, we just have a bunch of theories here. Now we're entering the DNA discussion as well. Okay, recent archaeological studies show very closely that the Etruscan arrived to Italy at about 900 BC carrying Y DNA. Well, that is one of the studies, I believe, but there are also I think there's also evidence of both Etruscans and Latins being very related genetically to each other, and tracing their genetic lineage further into the late Bronze Age. But I perhaps something that we could discuss in one of the next episodes. It's very tough. I mean, when it comes to the Etruscans, it's a whole different topic. So I wouldn't go there right now, but okay. So tell me, what do you think, everybody in the chat? Do we have Luvians, Greeks, separate Trojan identity in Troy, or perhaps different populations in different time periods? Actually, let me put a vote. Let me create a poll. Let's create a poll and vote and see what everybody thinks. And after the poll, we will conclude the episode and call it a day. Let's see. All right. Where do I create a poll here? All right. So All right, number one will be Luwian related. Number two will be Hellenic related. Number three is different slash distinct group, and number four will be change throughout time periods. All right. So option number one will be Luwian related speakers. So Luwians or Luwian related. Number two will be Hellenic related. Number three will be different slash distinct groups. So this covers, okay, so this covers distinct Trojan identity, or perhaps cousins or relatives or of Thracians, Phrygians, Mysians, and so on. Oh, Luis Aldami says no pool. Okay. So you do, would you like to vote or no? We're about to put this poll on just for fun to end the episode on an interesting note. Not This is not official poll, just to see what everybody thinks. A casual poll, no pressure. All right, so the poll is on actually. So I'll give 10 minutes for everybody to vote, and then we are going to conclude the episode, and we'll see you next week. And also, before we go, our next video will be the Lemnian language, also very interesting, very related to the region that we're talking about, the Aegean region, specifically the northern Aegean. The scenario is already done, and I will be doing the animations throughout the next 5 to 7 days. Once the video is done, it will go online. We'll talk about, we'll touch on the Lemnos stelae and the people behind it. We'll talk about Lemnos in the Greek sources, starting from Homer and Greek mythology, about those early inhabitants. We'll touch on Pelasgians. We'll touch on Tersanians. We do know that the Lemnian language, as displayed on the stelae and other fragments and inscriptions dated to 6th century BC, show a language related to Etruscans of Italy, and we do have Tersanian family of languages, which includes Etruscan, Lemnian, but also Raetic of the northern Italy region and Alps. And I believe Camunic, possibly a tribe related to Etruscans, possibly in the Po River Valley in northern Italy. So that will be the next episode. Right now, let's see what the next video, excuse me, the next live episode is coming normally next Sunday, and the topic is to be decided. We'll see what is it gonna be, but let's see what everybody says in the chat. Okay, so we have 44% Hellenic related, so we have a strong Hellenic patriot sentiment here on WanaxTV. Not surprising, but we have a 31% change throughout time periods, which is basically perhaps the closest to facts on the ground, I would say, but you never know. We have Luwian related 19%, different slash distinct group 6%. Luis Aldamis says democracy sucks. Plato was right. Well, nobody has absolute majority here. Hellenic related is only at 44%. So we do know that there was no democracy among the Mycenaeans. So here in WanaxTV, this is, I guess, perhaps not legally binding vote. So it just to see what everybody's opinion is. But I like the fact that we have 41% Hellenic related. So strong Hellenic sentiment here. That's I like that, but I would I would personally not go with Hellenic related throughout the whole history. I think at best we would, I mean, it is just speculation on my part, but I think that especially in the early Bronze Age, I think that the population of the site of Troy would have been a non-Indo-European speaking population. Perhaps genetically they would have been Hellenic related, especially if we take into account that both Mycenaeans and Minoans were mostly related. Most of their ancestry comes from the Aegean area, Aegean/Anatolian farmers. So I'm not an expert on genetics, but I imagine the whole area has a high percentage of such ancestry, and that would have included Troy as well. But if we discuss their identity and language, I would say that early Bronze Age, non-Indo-European language. Middle Bronze Age, I'm not sure. I'm not sure when the shift happened. Perhaps throughout the late Bronze Age, we have a mixed population. Perhaps we have a scenario close to or reminiscent to the city of Babylon. If anybody's familiar with the Babylonian history, you know how different dynasties were speakers of different languages throughout the history of Babylon, some related, some less related to each other, but they still had that local Babylonian identity. They still kept and respected the history of Babylon, and they saw themselves as Babylonians. Um, Zodami says they were Tersanians, probably. So frustrating all the Indo-European. Okay. Why would Troy ally with Hittites if Greek? Why not operate as a militus instead? Well, the option says Hellenic related, so not necessarily Greek. Greek, could be non-Greek within this second option. I wanted to include, for example, we do have maybe they were something between early mid Bronze Age Hellenic group and Proto-Phrygian group, but there was another branch that became Trojan. That's only a wild theory here, but Alexandros says professional fishermen, seafarers of Aegean transported domesticated plants and animals to Western Anatolia via Cyprus to Crete via sea. Okay. Red Carpet Time Traveler. Is Troy mentioned with Jason and Argonauts legend? It would have been on the way to Chalkis or another myth, maybe. So it is mentioned in the context of Heracles. When Heracles went to Troy with his own expedition before Trojan War, obviously. So it is mentioned in that context with mythical king Laomedon, the father of Priam. Heracles killed him and all of his sons except Priam, and then Priam became king of Troy after that. You know the rest. Pelasgian Skeleton says yes, it's mentioned. All right. All right. I think that we have Hellenic related 44%, changed throughout time periods 28%, Luwian related 17%. Well, obviously for many viewers that Luwian seal was not sufficient enough. and the different slash distinct group 11%. All right, so also let me know if you have any ideas or suggestions of what you would like to see in the next episode. We do have a lot of viewers, more so than many of the previous episodes right here. So perhaps we should continue with the Trojan topic next weekend. You let me know. I will have to wrap it up. Right now it's 5 p.m. here, and unfortunately, my schedule is pretty tight today. But I think that we went through all the topics, all the segments pretty well, except for the loss of sound at one portion of the stream. But it is what it is. We fixed it, and we went through all the segments, prehistorical and historical Troy. We went through the archaeological layers here. We went through the late Bronze Age site of Troy, corresponding to Velusa in the Hittite records, corresponding to Troy 6 and Troy 7a archaeologically. We went through the Luwian seal, and we went to different theories on the identity and language of the Trojans, perhaps Luwian related based on that seal. But very important caveat that the seal is from the Greek Dark Ages. It is not from the late Bronze Age. So no definite proof of how the seal ended up there. Still open to discussion. We also have a Hellenic related theory, mostly revolving around Alexandru, meaning Alexandros, Alexandru being Hittite rendering of a Greek name, Alexandros. So perhaps we had a Hellenic related dynasty at some point at the very least. Also very open to speculation, and obviously we went through a few other theories such as distinct slash other identity in Troy, perhaps related to some of the neighboring tribes, perhaps Thracians, Mysians, perhaps Phrygians, perhaps Pelasgians, who knows? And obviously a very plausible theory is that the population of the site of Troy changed, or at the very least evolved through the time periods, especially when we compare early Bronze Age, where we have perhaps a similar population culturally and in terms of archaeological type of the settlement, with the rest of the northern Aegean, especially the Aegean islands, Lesbos, Lemnos, but also some sites in Thessaly, in Greece. So perhaps the population evolved or changed over time, and then by the end of the late Bronze Age, we ended up having perhaps Indo-European speaking population. Also, more questions than answers that we have here, but I'm glad that we went through the topic. And with that being said, I'll see you next weekend with another interesting live episode, but also very likely the same weekend we will do a WanaxTV video, which will be on the Lemnian language and the Pelasgians, the Etruscans, and the people behind the stelae of Lemnos. With that being said, have a good day. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you soon.